Hey there guys, welcome back to the channel. In this episode we're moving on to kidney function 2. So the first thing we need to talk about in this lecture is defining osmolarity and its importance to renal function. So on the handout that you guys should have access to, it should look something a little bit like this. Osmolarity is defined as a measure of water concentration. So you can use that to fill in the definition. You need to understand that higher osmolarity is equal to lower water concentration. So if you're somebody who just wants to memorize osmolarity is like the reverse of water concentration. But another way you could look at it is that higher osmolarity means that there's lots of dissolved particles. So it's like how much water is it around how much salt. So if there's loads of salt and not much water, then there's a high osmolarity, because then there's the potential for lots of water to move in. So it has a high osmolarity. You see what I mean? The highest water potential, or water potential is the same as water concentration, but water potential is what we're meant to say. The highest one is 0, and we use that little pitchfork sort of symbol to show water potential. That's in pure water. So that's the highest value, 0. Anything lower than that, or anything more, anything lower than that will start to be negative values. And that means we start to have, in our water we have solutes or salts. So things like Na+, or all manner of things, K+. And we know that water moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. So if you have lots of water and salty water, then the water will move that way to try and dissolve the solutes. Okay, great. So now I've finished waffling on about that, which most people probably already knew, but if you didn't, that's fine, that's totally fine if it's the first time hearing about osmolarity and water potential and that sort of thing. So there's this thing called osmolarity and osmolality. One of them has an R and one of them has an extra L. So the one with the extra L is the preferred one because it's independent of temperature. So this is the one where the values are something like milliosmoles per kilogram. So it's to do with mass, whereas osmolarity is to do with per litre, so milliosmoles per litre, and then that's affected by temperature. So that's why we prefer to use osmolarity. And then there's some key figures for you to know on this bit. So that's that the plasma osmolarity is about 300, whereas in urine it can vary, it can really vary. It can be anything from 50 to 1400. So that would be really high, and that would be really low osmolarity. Really high osmolarity means there's loads of solutes in there. So it's not very dilute, so very concentrated urine, dark colour, whereas very dilute urine would be a much lower value. Now these values are important because then when we look at the kidney and we compare, sorry, this is a dreadful version of drawing of the nephron in the kidney. The blood vessels that are floating around will be at 300 milliosmoles, except for when we get to the loop of Henle, but I'll talk about that later. And whereas the osmolarity in the nephron can vary depending on where we are. Okay, so that's kind of like an very general introduction. So describe the processes of salt and water absorption throughout the nephron. So we know that there's mitochondria in the proximal tubule, PCT, thick ascending limb, so part of the loop of Henle, distal tubule, and the collecting duct. So you'll find mitochondria pretty much everywhere in the nephron except for where isn't there sodium reabsorption. You won't find any in the descending limb of the loop of Henle. No sodium reabsorption there. Let's draw our classic nephron diagram yet again. I do apologise, I think these are actually getting worse and worse and worse every time I draw these. Right, so we know 65% of the filtrate is reabsorbed at the PCT. 25% is reabsorbed at the loop of Henle. Then in terms of distinguishing between the thick and the thin areas, so this is actually the thick bit, which is a horrendous diagram. Okay, there we go. So sorry, I did mess up a little bit, so I had to redo my drawing. I just wanted to emphasise that there's like an imaginary line here that divides this bit from here up is the cortex of the kidney, and then from the same imaginary line down is the medulla of the kidney. And by that I just mean like, so there's a picture of your kidney, there's the, renal pelvis that has the ureter, and you have the outer layer of the kidney, which is this bit here that I'm shading a little bit. That's the cortex, and then the inner bit is called the medulla, and this nephron just kind of laces itself. It's PCT and DCT. It's kind of found more squished in real life. It's not splayed out like this. The PCT and DCT are all up here, and then the loops come down into the medulla, and then is this on the drawing? Yeah, let's go, and then back up with the DCT. But it's more squished than that. It's more like condensed, and it's also in like these pyramids as well, and you have loads of them. So and also they're filtering about 180 litres of water per day. So and we talked about this the other week at the study club sessions. That is a lot of water. You know, you think how much water is in a bottle of water is like 50 centilitres. So that means 360 bottles of water are being filtered by just one kidney, right? 360 water bottles. Well, that's like, I don't know, like 10 small child's paddling pools, if you like. Whatever helps you visualise how much water is being filtered. But then a lot of it is being reabsorbed, so it's all being cleaned out, removing the urea. Anyway, back to what we're talking about today. Last time we talked about the PCT, we said about Na plus gets reabsorbed, so it gets pumped out, and then you need to know about Na plus moves from the lumen into the cell via two transporters, exchanger and the symporter. So the symporter is what we have when we're moving two things in at the same time, passively in the same direction. So this will be our Na plus, and then tagged along with it is something like glucose. And that's for symporter. Then for exchanger, this will be when we're pumping in Na plus and exchanging out hydrogen. Although, sorry, I should say not pumping. So this is not using ATP. This is like a passive coupled movement. The next point was that Na plus is moving down its concentration gradient at the top into the capillaries. It's not. It is moving. It's being pumped out. So that's not down. But when I'm talking about moving down here, I mean from the tubule lumen of the tubule into the epithelial cell. It is moving. It's diffusing down because we've got a low Na plus concentration here because of the pumping out of sodium. Okay, cool. Next step we were talking about, also just to make it crystal clear, so Na plus is sodium. Then, as we mentioned, exchanger and symporter. So the exchanger, H plus, is then pumped into the lumen. Okay, so it says pumped, so maybe it does use ATP. Right, let me just check. Okay, guys, I'm back. So as I can see from online, there is no pumping as such, but the Na plus is moving. Sorry, the H plus is moving down its concentration from the epithelial cell into the tubule lumen. So yes, you don't have to worry about ATP here, and then nutrients, yeah, come out of the lumen and into the cell. Next bit, so we've talked about the PCT, now we can move on to the loop of Henle. We have co-transporter channel protein, which is the Na plus, K plus and 2Cl minus channel, which we'll find in the loop, and the sodium potassium pump and K plus channel, or channels, because there'll be loads of these. And then finally, I mean, there are other channels, but I'm just mentioning the ones that are involved in the way sodium is controlled. Another co-transporter, and the sodium potassium pump. Okay. So if you understand the way it works in the PCT, you basically understand how it works in the loop and the DCT. There's just some more finer details, like a bit of chloride is involved in the loop, and that sort of thing. But we'll go through that. So there's quite a nice diagram on the screen right now for you to look at, which shows you the changes in osmolarity from the glomerulus. So it says 290, but you could say 300 if you like a nice round number, or like a nicer round number. And if we just focus on the loop of Henle and what the osmolarity changes are there, then I can cover that. So thin and then thick. So, to start off with, we have the sodium potassium chloride co-transporter, which uses ATP indirectly. As sodium and potassium are pumped out and in, respectively, K plus and chloride then leak out, and they can leak out together via symporter, as shown on the screen. So this is basically how chloride is reabsorbed. It needs to be coupled with K plus, but then the same thing happens in the thick ascending limb. So up at the top here, we have sodium, chloride, and potassium. All of these pumping in. Well, not pumped directly, because it's because of Na plus. You've created a low concentration of it from the pumping out of the sodium potassium pump, that the rest of them are able to couple together and all come in. So that's how that works. And that's what we have going on over here. So if we start over here and work our way back round, then you can understand how the loop works and the countercurrent multiplier. So Na plus is being pumped out, same with Cl minus, K plus is moving back and forth, as you can see on the on-screen diagram rather than this physical one. Then step 2 is water is not able to escape. Water is not able to follow sodium out because the thick ascending limb is impermeable to water. Then, because we create a high concentration of sodium in the surrounding fluid, some of it is taken up by the blood capillaries, which will be sort of floating around. And in this area, the blood capillaries are known as the vasa recta, surrounding the loop of Henle. So they'll be mopping up the sodium and the chloride. But some of it will also, because you have a high concentration of it, will then passively diffuse in back into the loop of Henle via the thin descending limb. Also, because you're creating this high concentration of salts, water will move out. So that means as you start to go down the loop of Henle, you start off with this 300 milliosmoles per kg, because we're taking osmolarity L with the kg one, so it's not affected by temperature. As you go down, it starts to become more and more hypertonic. hypertonic, and then it goes to like 600, and then it ends up at 1200. So, or 1400 as it says in this diagram, which is fine. It's all kind of roughly the same sorts of numbers. And then as you then come up here, up the ascending limb, as I said up here, you start getting this pumping out of sodium and chloride, and then the water can't leave, so it starts to rise in, and it goes back up, and eventually it actually goes up to 100. So where it's a lower osmolarity by the end of it. And it's still impermeable to H2O up here as well, apparently, as it shows on this diagram. Also, this electronic diagram is taken from the lecture slides, so definitely should be correct. On the next page, we have more details on what's actually going on, the changes within the tubule, like layered on top of each other as each exportation of salt is happening. So that's sort of like the flow of it, if you want to read through. And then I'll just read out the summary. So step 1, filtrate enters with the same osmolarity as plasma. So if you remember, this grey line, sorry, this is not the best depiction of it. This grey line is supposed to represent blood. I'm now changing it to red. And this will have the same osmolarity. And then we start to change it, and this is so we can reabsorb some more salt. Okay, so filtrate enters with the same osmolarity as plasma, and ultimately ends up leaving with a much lower osmolarity, therefore develops quite a dilute urine here, because we've got loads of water and not much salt. As you go down the loop, you have a gradient of increasing osmolarity, both inside and outside. So what's happening outside is mirroring what's happening inside the loop of Henle. And you can compare that by looking at this other diagram of the capillaries that are forming like a loop, and they're mirroring the same osmolarity as the loop of Henle. So that's in the vasa recta. And the idea is that, now the idea about the countercurrent multiplier is this situation where we just keep the removal of salts going. So the salts get excreted out. Sorry, not excreted, that's not the right word. So the salts get pumped out. They get mopped up by the capillaries take it away, and that continually creates a situation where you can keep on pumping out Na+. So the loop is kind of going back this way, whereas the capillaries are taking it away, the salt, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, poor explanation, but that's as well as I understand it. If that is incorrect, please let me know. Maybe I'll do some more research and put it on screen of what the countercurrent multiplier is. Okay, cool. So, but if none of that was clear, and like me, you're stressed for the exam, you just need to memorise something really straightforward, then here is what you need to know. Starts off isotonic. Isotonic means that the concentration of the loop of Henle is the same as what's in the plasma, which is in the blood capillary. So it's about 300 or 290 for the loop of Henle, and it's about 300 or 290 for the blood plasma. Then it starts to become hypertonic. Hypertonic means higher solute. So the tonic always is to do with solute, so more solutes at the bottom, and then it becomes hypotonic when it becomes, there's less solutes, there's more water and more dilute, and hence a lower osmolarity. Okay, and then, so that's pretty much that. Then we can have a look at what's going on in the collecting duct. So the collecting duct more or less depends on the amount of ADH and how ADH interacts with the walls of the collecting duct and causes more water to be reabsorbed into the blood capillaries, or more water gets excreted out of the body. And it also depends on, you know, how low or high your blood pressure is and all that sort of thing, and renin and aldosterone, other chemicals. So anyway, what do we have here? Action of ADH. ADH binds to a receptor. It's labelled on here as a V2 receptor. That wasn't something I ever... Oh, okay, so it is pointed out there. So I didn't really memorise that, I just remembered. ADH binds to... Oh, there's another term for it. Another term for ADH is vasopressin. Oh, hang on, let me write that again. Vasopressin. So if you see that written anywhere, vasopressin is ADH. So ADH binds to a V2 receptor, which is attached to a G protein that triggers adenyl cyclase to synthesize CAMP from ATP. So this is all to do with the cell signaling 1 and 2 module lectures that we covered in BMSO2. So pKa gets made or triggered, and then that causes, oh, it's not outlined here, but pKa does something to the gene transcription. It switches on some genes and it tells the cell, you need to make some more water channel proteins, so more water can be reabsorbed from the tubule filtrate. So we want to stop it from flowing out of the body. We want to reabsorb more water, and then once the water's got through, it can then go into the surrounding tissue fluid, interstitial fluid as I should call it, and then reabsorb back into the blood, because the blood will be over here somewhere into the capillaries. And that's basically what happens. So the name for water channel proteins is aquaporins, AQP2 must be the name for the water channel, this specific one in the collecting duct. Okay, cool. So that's what's going on there. Yeah.